Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. This episode should be dropping on Monday, February 6th, which marks 1 month of the show being live. And if you're already a regular listener, thanks for being here. And if not, welcome to the show. As always, feel free to pass this show around. It's meant for truck drivers and everybody else that has lots of time to listen, but mostly truckers. So if you know a trucker, send this to them. If you are a trucker, share it with other truckers. I don't advertise really, and this show is only going to get to the ears of others by word of mouth, because that's the best advertising there is. Speaking of trucking, at the end of March, I will be in attendance at the Great American Truck Show in Louisville, Kentucky. The folks at GATS have made a curious error by mistaking me for something y'all might call a social media influencer. I don't consider myself anything of the sort. However, they've given me media credentials. In exchange for that, I suppose I have to advertise for them. The Great American Truck Show is free. I do believe they would like you to register, though, before you come. And there's a registration code associated with myself in this show. If you do register, do me a favor and use the code ZVZTMZ. Thank you very much. Since the show's been out, I've gotten a little bit of feedback. People seem to really like the intro music. And while we're here, I should give a shout out to a now defunct garage band from Toronto called Grand Total and their song Skin Diver. Grand Total are no more. I can't find any trace of them on the internet, really, other than some old ads for gigs. If anyone out there knows anyone in Grand Total or they're listening, thanks for the track. If you're offended I used it, I don't know, send me an email. Maybe we can work something out. My friend Ben Rama mixed the music and my voice. You can find Ben on Twitter at Ben Rama Music. He's the impresario behind a psychedelic techno record label called Technosis Records. You can find them on the online, technosisrecords.bandcamp.com. Ben is also a great graphic designer, and he came up with the lovely logo you see that says Voice of Gord, with the heavens opening and the joke being very well played. Whilst I'm thanking people, a little shout out to my friends at the Good Old Boys podcast who've had me on 3 times. They're lovely guys. Their show is great. Good content. It is what it is. They're the Good Old Boys. You'll figure them out. You can go find them on Patreon. Tuesday evenings they do a live stream on Twitch. One of these days, if I don't have to get out of bed at 3 in the morning, I might rejoin them for one. We shall see. Some of you may also know I do a little bit of writing on the side. This past Friday, the folks at Compact Magazine published something I written about a major problem we have back home in Canada with the government having banks and financial institutions attack dissenters in a very underhanded way, using legislation that was made permanent during the invocation of the Emergencies Act. I describe the situation with a fellow named Jeremy McKenzie in the article and try to make a warning about the grave dangers of your right to speak and dissent being threatened by being removed from participation in the economy by having your bank account canceled. Scary shit. You should all read it. You can go to my Twitter at Driver Autonomy and scroll down. You'll find it. Or go on over to compactmag.com. Those guys are great. Lots of great writers over there. Interesting takes on politics and the culture of the day. Right, next up, we're going to have a few more guests in the coming weeks I want to tell you about. My friend Dee will be here. She's a public school teacher in the city of Toronto, a union representative, and we will be discussing something of a disconnect between public sector unions and the Freedom Convoy and the notion of bodily autonomy, specifically in Canada. If you're thinking to yourself, well, my union's all good, well, it's not about that union. This is, very, very specific subject, but we also get into the wider COVID regime and the reckoning we all need to have with the folks who turned our society upside down for the last 3 years. Other guests upcoming include everyone's favorite supply chain expert, Ross Kennedy, aka Huntsman. Great guy. If you guys are on Twitter and paid attention to Twitter in the last couple of years, especially during the Wuhan plague overreaction and everyone's supply chains getting screwed up and the term supply chain becoming a part of regular vernacular where it wasn't before, Huntsman's the guy. He's amazing. He knows his stuff. I just sort of turned the mic over to him and let him go, and it's a great listen. I can't wait to get it to you guys. Another guest we have coming up is Dr. Ashley Frawley, a sociologist and lecturer at the University of Swansea in Wales. Ashley and I met online last year when she was curious about the Freedom Convoy and found me, and we had a couple of very nice chats, and we've kind of been online friends ever since. Ashley identifies as many things. She's a young Ojibwe woman from sort of central Ontario, and she's also a Marxist. So we're going to talk about a little bit about Marx, the working class, the Frankfurt School, all things in between, and how that relates to my project. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. Ooh, scary Marxist, look out. Another guest I have coming up is Dr. Karen Levy, another sociologist at Cornell University here in my backyard of Ithaca, New York. Karen just released a book in December called Data-Driven Truckers, Technology, and the New Workplace Surveillance. I have a review of that book coming out on February 20th at American Affairs Journal. We're really looking forward to getting that out there. And Karen has agreed to come on the show. And we are going to talk about her book, her seeming love affair with truckers, and her life story, how she became an academic, and all of her thoughts on the surveillance nightmare we're all having to tolerate now in these once free United States of America and other places where this infection has spread. All right, well, I guess we should get on to the show. My guest today is a young lady named Jessica Bonsor, who's lived the life aquatic. We chatted for about an hour and a half, and she shared her many stories of life at sea. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this, especially my female listeners, female truckers who know what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated industry. Without any further delay, on to the show. All right, good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. Today we have a very special guest zooming in all the way from Halifax, Nova Scotia. A young woman who I've become acquainted with through my friend Delia. A very fascinating life story. Her name's Jessica. She's lived a life on the high seas, driving oil tankers, drilling rigs, works for the Coast Guard now. People sort of know this show and me as a truck driver, and I interview lots of different interesting people in logistics and supply chains and life on the road. Well, the high seas are also a road and very important to international logistics and all that fun stuff. So I'm very honored to have Jessica here to tell us all about it today. Good morning, Jessica.
Good morning, Gord. Yeah, you cut out there for a minute. Thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here and join you on your show. And you're right, there are some similarities. We on the high seas, we follow the collision regulations, also known as the rules of the road. A
Collision
little bit,
collision pardon me, collision regulations.
yeah, to avoid collisions, the the proper actions to take to avoid collisions. Yeah. Um,
That's the actual name of it, though. There's like some kind of like international seafaring body, and that's literally what they called it.
yes.
That's funny. You work for the Coast Guard now, correct?
I do. Yeah, I started with the Coast Guard in June of 2018 when my son was about 15, 16 months old. So I had sort of retired from going to sea after he was born, and I wanted to remain in the industry somehow. And yeah, the Coast Guard provided some opportunities to get my foot in the door. So it's been a real eye-opening experience to be on the other side of in the office, because oftentimes in the industry you get a bit of us versus them with people on board the ships and people in the office. So
Wow, color me shocked.
yeah, on the ships themselves, you get the rivalries between the navigation side versus the engine room, or some of the subsea construction. It was the marine crew versus the construction crew. There's always little cliques and not so much cliques, I guess, but rivalries that friendly rivalries that form. But when it comes to the ships versus the office, it always seemed a little bit of a bigger divide. But I'm hoping that I can, help to bridge that gap, having come from a fleet, not Coast Guard fleet. I never did sail on their ships, just went straight into the office there.
But you do have a fairly lengthy career on boats.
I do. I do. About 18 years of seagoing experience. I how it all began. I actually attended Lakehead University, majoring in a fine arts program. And after 4 years of that and not quite finishing, I decided it wasn't actually what I wanted to do. I spent 2 days in the university library looking through all of the university and college course calendar books. And I originally was thinking I would do some kind of 1 year program at a college, go in, get a trade or something, get out and start working. And then I saw this program, Marine Navigation Technology. And I thought to myself, yeah, I could drive a boat. But it was a 3 year program. So anyway, I was like, yep, this is it. I'll give this a whirl. And so I went to Owen Sound, Georgian College campus, did 3 years of marine navigation technology. And you start off with 2 semesters in the classroom, learning all sorts of things, basic seamanship skills, chart work, uh, astro navigation, thermodynamics, you do some basic engineering knowledge, some ship's architecture, all sorts of things. And then you start your first sea phase as a cadet. And my first cadet term, I flew from Ontario to St. John, New Brunswick, and walked aboard my first oil tanker.
Right.
And
That's interesting journey. Just for the sake of some members of my audience might not be 100% familiar with the geography up north. Lakehead University is the biggest school in northern Ontario. It's in the city of Thunder Bay. Uh,
yes.
the mistake by the lake, although I'm not quite sure if that means Thunder Bay or Cleveland. Um, and then Owen Sound. Owen Sound is actually where my great grandfather first ended up when he moved to Canada from Ireland in like 1929. Well, nearby Owen Sound, there's another little place called Meaford where there's a Canadian Armed Forces
yes.
base. And Owen Sound and Meaford are kind of on that little peninsula almost that divides the Georgian Bay section of Lake Huron from the rest of the lake, which is one of North America's Great Lakes for anyone listening in the international audience. So it should be no surprise that there's a seafaring school basically right in the middle of the lakes. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually called the Great Lakes International Marine Training Center portion of it that does the marine navigation and marine engineering programs. And yeah, it's there on the base of the Bruce Peninsula. And I've often heard Owen Sound called the elephant's asshole. If you look at Ontario and you kind of turn it a little bit, that lower portion of southern Ontario, you will see an elephant. And right there where the tail lifts up, that's Owen Sound.
oh wow, I haven't ever looked at the map that way, but basically everything south of Highway 17 should be cleansed from the earth with the thermonuclear weapon, but that's another conversation. Interestingly, back to my grandfather, or my great grandfather, you would know what the Cutty Sark was, yes?
Yes.
Right. So my great 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 grandfather, I don't know how many greats, was a seaman on the Cutty Sark,
Oh, wow.
and then on another, I don't know if it's the exact lineage. This is all on my dad's side of the family on the Irish side. So I had one ancestor sailed on the Cutty Sark, which was the last of the sailing tea ships. It was the fastest, but then replaced by steam. And another ancestor on that side of the family worked at the shipyards and worked on the Titanic, the very ill-fated and most famous boat ever.
Indeed. Yes. The it's that's quite a good connection to the sea for sure.
Yeah, but and yours was just a visit to the library.
Yeah, yeah, there's no seafarers in my family. Although my dad was a transportation economist, so he did have some connection. He had done actually gave a paper at the World Container Ship Convention in Singapore one year, many decades ago.
Interesting. So, in his capacity as a transportation economist, so like, is he just like nerding out in an office for some company, or what was he doing?
Actually, he was a economics professor at Lakehead University.
Oh,
Um,
wow. So your dad taught there. Interesting.
yeah, yeah, that was one of the reasons to stay and go to Lakehead. Uh,
Did you get a discount on your tuition?
I did. I did. It was uh, you don't pay the tuition, you just pay the tax on the tuition. So it was a
So,
good deal to stay there and go and remain there for 4 years and not walk away with any special pieces of paper. So yeah.
well, you mentioned you studied fine arts, and like I'm trying to square the circle here. Fine arts to marine navigation. What exactly were the fine arts you were studying, and do you practice any of them still?
So my major was ceramics. So I used to have a potter's wheel and do a lot of stuff. Friend of my mother's was a professional potter, and so from a young age I started getting lessons from her. And then growing up, my dad made a deal with my sister and I that he would either pay for our education or our weddings. So we had to choose, and we both chose education. So I went to Lakehead for 4 years, and then went to Owen Sound for three. And my sister also went to Lakehead for 4 years, but walked away with a degree. And then she did a year at a university in France. That was also part of the deal.
do you
She later went on to get her master's and PhD, but that was much later and
do,
not
do
part of
you
the
do
deal.
you and your sister speak French? Are you guys bilingual?
No, well, my sister is closer to being bilingual than I am. I speak a certain amount of French. My husband is bilingual, and I've got my son in a full French school. And his school offers free French classes for any parent who wishes to upgrade their French. So I'm enrolled in 22 weeks of French classes at the moment to improve my usage of the language.
Oh, very good. No, it's just interesting because Delia's husband JJ, I guess, is trilingual, English, French, and Finn.
Oh, I don't know how good his Finn really is, but yeah, he's he definitely he does have a good handle on languages. He picks up a lot of phrases anywhere they go. He can get by in Portugal and Italian and Portuguese and Italian as well.
So
So no.
you know how I met those two, eh? So I'm at this party in Toronto. There's you know how they like hang out with all these techno weirdos. I used to be amongst them, and we'll leave it at that. Anyway, we're at Cherry Beach, which is one of the few sort of nice areas along the waterfront in Toronto.
I've been
Um,
to some Cherry Beach parties.
oh
Yeah.
boy, yeah. Well, so you know what I'm talking about then, right? So I uh, I go to one of these Cherry Beach things in like I don't know 2007 or eight or something like that, and back when they were small, like before they'd gotten so big and out of control, they were fencing things off and charging admission. This is like
Oh.
maybe 150 people. So I'm speaking with one friend, and this other dude sort of shows up, and he's got a kind of a mullet and kind of like a biker handlebar mustache almost, and a t-shirt that says T Bay. And
Yeah.
I says to him, "Is that supposed to be Thunder Bay or Terrace Bay?" And like he immediately starts laughing, and he goes, "No, man, Thunder Bay, the mistake by the lake. How'd you know that? Where are you from?"
That's our JJ.
Yeah, well, I lived in Thunder Bay for a spell too. My dad's older brother, my late uncle Bruce, lived in Armstrong, which is, as you know, 150 miles basically straight north. He lived there for most of his life. My cousin Jay and his wife Yolanda still live in Thunder Bay and have a second home in Armstrong. My aunt Kate and Uncle Dennis live in Thunder Bay. A couple of
What's
my
your what's Yolanda's last name?
Wanakamek.
I used to work with Yolanda at the keg.
Wow, yeah. Why am I not surprised? Yeah, Yoli ended up working at Lakehead for a while too.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So you're in Owen Sound, you do your course, and then you go to St. John. I'm assuming the boat that you walked onto in St. John, this is in New Brunswick, not St. John's in Newfoundland, right?
Correct. St. John, New Brunswick.
And
The
the oil tanker was owned by Irving. Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, correct. Yes. It was the Irving Arctic, which no longer exists. It's gone to the scrap metal in India. Yes, it was the Irving Arctic owned by the Irvings. They have their refinery in St. John. We loaded all our product there and then went to various locations along the eastern seaboard to do our deliveries, offload product. We carried all kinds of stuff. We carried jet fuel, low sulfur diesel, high sulfur diesel, gasoline, not liquid natural gas, but anyway, we went to like Halifax, Sydney, Nova Scotia. We'd go to Charlottetown in PEI. We'd go to Corner Brook and St. John's in Newfoundland. We'd go to the Gaspé Peninsula, Trois Rivières, Montreal. We'd go down into the States, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, New Haven, Connecticut, Boston, places like that. And then go back to St. John to load again.
Do you remember specifically how many liters of product your tanker would hold?
Uh, no, we usually measured it in barrels. It was quite a bit.
So so the barrel measurement means 44 gallons, correct? Or is it 45?
Oh, you're getting technical on me here now. My brain hasn't had to think about these things in a long time. 42 gallons.
Right, which would be roughly 160 liters, roughly.
It was we carried a lot.
Yeah.
And it was open loading. So there were fumes everywhere. I almost passed out one time loading fuel.
So yeah, so they didn't have a vapor recovery system for I would think given the volumes you're hauling on a ship, they would want to do vapor recovery because they're basically like you can put that stuff through a condenser unit and get more fuel back out of the deal.
Yeah, but this ship was built, I believe, in 1974. Technology was different.
Right. So when you say open loading, that so I hauled fuel when I drove truck
Yeah.
for quite a long time, and most of it's bottom loading. There's still a few tank farms, bulk plants here and there that are still, trapped in the 19th century with top loading facilities.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to imagine when you say open loading, like
So,
is it just like a spigot just dumping it in the boat?
well, so we connected the pipelines to a manifold on deck, and then the product went through the pipelines and into the tanks. Now, on the deck of the ship, they had these big openings that we would unbolt and slide over to the side. And also, they just had these like the fumes just shot out of them. Like if you
So you're
stepped,
basically you're venting to the atmosphere, but like ship size.
yeah.
Wow, I that doesn't still go on, does it?
I wouldn't think so. No, I haven't been on a tanker in a while. I think my last, let me look back through my discharge book here. My last tanker, here we go. 2001 was the last time I was actually on a tanker. So leaps and bounds have been, developed in the way they do these things since then. But yeah, like because we would take ullages, we had these measuring tapes with like basically a cork on the bottom of them, and you would reel it down into this opening until the cork hit the fluid. And then you'd look at what the measuring tape said, and then that's how you'd be able to calculate how much you'd loaded, how much space was left in the tank.
Wow, that's like what we used to do in the dips when you arrive at a gas station to see how much product they can accommodate.
Yeah, and um, sometimes you're trying to also look with the flashlight when you're topping up the tank to make sure you don't overflow. And it's like the rate at which the product is loading is pushing the air out of that tank and fumes along with it. And yeah, certain products you really don't want to get that in your face, but can't help but doing it. And yeah, so that made for some interesting moments. We did all kinds of things on those tanks. They used to carry like a crude bunker that was thick and then needed to be heated. So we had heating coils in the tanks. But when they stopped carrying that product, we then had to go into the tanks and cut them out, cut all the heating coils out, send them up on deck, and send it ashore to get money for the scrap. And we all had our little devices on us that would monitor the levels of different gases in the tank. And if anybody's alarm started going off, out you go.
Wow. So those coils, they were basically single use then, like one and done?
No, they were in there for years, but it was just the life of the ship. It no longer was going to carry that product. So they removed it for the minute amount of space it would increase to carry more of the other products that we were still carrying.
Right. Life on ship. How many crew members on a oil tanker?
That one had 23.
From the captain on down to who? Like, what's everybody's role when you have a crew that's only that size?
We had a captain, a chief mate, a second mate, and a third mate. We carried a bosun, three watchmen or able-bodied seamen, ABs, and a day worker on deck. There would be a chief engineer, second engineer, third engineer, and three oilers, a cook and a second cook slash steward. I'm sure I'm forgetting some people.
And
Um,
what's the bosun?
So bosun is short for boatswain, and he's kind of like a deck foreman. He's generally the most experienced deckhand who then is the liaison. So the chief mate is in charge of assigning the jobs for the day for the deck crew. So he'll have a little, have his morning coffee with the bosun. And they'll chat about what they're going to do for the day. And then the bosun goes down and uh, assigns the jobs to the deck crew and kind of monitors the progress of that. And then if he notices anything while out on deck that needs to be fixed, repaired, addressed, he'll, let the chief mate know and take care of that. Generally, they're pretty good with their rope work and splicing. Oh, that ship also carried a pumpman. There was a room with like 60 valves that you had to turn by hand to set up the correct configuration for loading the product into the right tanks. So yeah, we had a pumpman on that vessel as well, which on the newer models that are all computer operated, you wouldn't require that position.
Right. I was going to say, because it sounds like the pumpman wouldn't be very busy while you were out at sea. He'd just be loading and unloading, right?
I'm sure he had some other, maintenance and things to take care of, but yeah, he was definitely busy, flat out, as they'd say, when we were in port.
Right. Let's say you leave St. John
Yep.
and you head down to Boston. How long does that take you at sea?
St. John to Boston's not that long a trip. Maybe less than a day, I would think.
Wow. So basically, you would make it there in the same time as the truck would, leaving St. John, driving through New Brunswick, crossing the border down through Maine and all that. You,
It
ba-
might have been longer than that, but I mean, that's one thing my brain doesn't. I'd have to, like, every trip I would have to look and review the passage plan. It might take a bit longer, but it's not that far.
right.
Uh,
And so, what were you
and
what were you doing on the boat? Were you the navigator?
yeah, I was a ship's officer, navigator on board. So depending on what position, because I sailed as everything, like uh, throughout my career, as I said, I started as a cadet. I did work as a deckhand. I was the third mate, second mate, first mate. And then after leaving the tankers, I went to offshore oil and gas industry and I got my dynamic positioning operator's license. So I also worked as a dynamic positioning operator, which is a different way to control the movements of the ship. But yeah, when you're an officer on board, you'd be assigned different duties. So you might be the navigation officer, and you'd be in charge of all the chart corrections, passage planning, updating the electronic charts, different things like that. Or you might be considered the safety officer on board. So then your role, like every month, you'd have to check all the fire extinguishers, check all the lifeboats or rescue craft, any firefighting equipment on board, like the hoses and nozzles, check the like EPIRBs and SARTs. That's the emergency position indicating radio beacon or a search and rescue transponder. So there's all kinds of different equipment on board that you might be responsible for. Like when you're at sea, you can't call 911 for assistance, so you have to basically be a jack of all trades. Um, and we do an intensive amount of, say, first aid training and marine emergency duties training, which you have to now renew every 5 years. And with that, it is learning about all the different types of fire extinguishers and how to maintain them, how to use them, what to use them for, lifeboats, what equipment's required to be carried on board a lifeboat, how to operate them safely. You do training on hypothermia. You have to get into a big wave pool and like they flip a life raft upside down. You have to be able to ride it and get into it from the water. So there's a lot of different training that you have to undertake simply because when you're at sea, you're
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're on your own.
Yeah, and like the tankers we didn't carry a medic. Most of the larger offshore vessels do carry a full like medic, and there's a hospital on board of sorts, like with a more equipment than you would carry on a vessel without one. But you hope you never need it, but at some point you do.
Right, but you guys like if you're so you're basically doing what might be considered the marine equivalent of local delivery, right? Like you're not getting too far away from your home port of St. John.
On the tankers, we weren't. No, on the
Right.
tankers, we weren't. And like in St. John, we wouldn't stay for much longer than 12 hours. Everything there was revolved around the tides. And that's basically 12 hours, from high tide to high tide. So you could only travel on the tides.
Yeah, so
If you miss,
The St. John River empties into the Bay of Fundy, which has the highest tide change in the world, correct?
correct.
So what's the how much like what's the difference between high and low tide there on average? Like
I
how
think
many
it's about, I think it's about 26 feet.
that's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's as you say, the highest tides in the world. And so that's why we're dependent on that, just to make sure that when you're going to the dock, you have enough water below the keel. Especially with those Irving tankers, they were only single hulled, meaning that, there was just about an inch of steel between a whole bunch of petroleum products in the ocean. So you wouldn't want to be running that aground. Now all the tankers are double hulled, so they have void space underneath the tank, so that if you do have a disaster where you hit bottom or something, there's you're not going straight into a cargo tank.
Right. Wow. So 26 feet. I'm just like imagine for a minute. I used to work near a port in Australia called Dampier. And there was I used to service rig tenders sometimes as part of my jobs down one of my jobs down there. So basically hauling drilling fluids and mud and baskets full of equipment and casing and drill tube and all your parts and equipment that go on and off of offshore drilling rig. But at Dampier, they also had an iron ore loading facility. There's a bunch of these ports along the northwest coast of Australia because there's a big mountain range there called the Hammersley Ranges, and that's one of the world's largest iron ore deposits. And so they have all these trains that come in and they load the boats, and it would be incredible. You'd see an empty iron ore boat would come down from wherever they were coming from in Asia, and I think it was something like 8 meters between like once they would pull into port, get loaded, and that's how far down this. What do you call it? What's the technical term for when a boat is sitting loaded in the water at maximum capacity?
Yeah, so that's the vessel's draft.
Right.
And on the side, they'll have painted draft marks, so you can see when they're in light ship mode or ballast or fully loaded. You can see how much of the vessel is then below the water line.
If you're operating an oil tanker, I'm assuming you can't just like pump ocean water into the same tanks as that you had product in. Like, is there separate ballast tanks for taking on ocean water for when you're empty?
Yes. Yeah, there's separate lines and pumps and tanks. It's like on some ships they will convert the tanks after the fact, so some cargo tanks can become it, but they'll have to be cleaned out and all the lines flushed before you could do that, because yeah, you're not wanting to pump any of that product over the side. One problem that did occur, you might be familiar with zebra mussels in the Great Lakes,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
that came from contaminated ballast water coming in off a foreign ship, and then they pumped it out in the lakes, and the zebra mussels were not caught in the filters, and they got into the Great Lakes.
Wow. So they really were brought from somewhere else. They were the definition of an invasive species.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And then they've got some new regulations on ballast and ballast pumping and things like that, it always takes some form of disaster to make improvements to the operations.
Did you ever get up into the Great Lakes or like just as far as Montreal?
Yeah, no, I never actually sailed commercially on the Great Lakes. I did uh, pleasure craft sailing on the Great Lakes quite a bit growing up, but no, I didn't ever commercially sail on the lakes because right from the get-go, I went to the ocean and it stole my heart.
Vast open spaces do that. I'm a big fan of deserts, somewhat opposite of the ocean, but I've been to Australia a few times. I always like trucking in the outback. The Western United States, I'm a big fan of Nevada and like the sort of high desert Eastern Oregon. There's just nobody around, and all that empty space and like the sort of the visual of being able to look out and see nothing, like it sort of puts a bit of a buzz on your head, eh?
Yeah, well, it's the sunrises and sunsets that are like unimpeded by
Anything.
buildings, anything. Yeah, it's really nice. I on certain vessels I worked 4 to 8 watch. So I worked 4 till 8 in the morning and 4 till 8 p.m. So you always got the best sunrises and sometimes sunsets, depending where you were in the time of year. But
That's awesome. So speaking of like psychology and buzzes on heads and you know the sort of fringe benefits of working on a boat, do you care to discuss the sort of the psychology and the vibes of being a woman on a boat full of dudes?
yeah, that's definitely a big
You
part
don't
of
you,
my
you
experience.
don't have to if that's too uncomfortable a question. You don't
No,
have to answer it, but I am curious.
no, I took the approach that every time I stepped aboard, I was gaining a whole bunch of brothers. And, you know, I feel like it was harder for some of them to accept having me on board than it was for me to personally be there. I got a wide range of reactions. Yeah, some of the older generation would either kind of went one of two ways. It was either like it's bad luck to have a woman on board, or like they thought it was their granddaughter or something, and like, oh dear, let me get that for you, dear, and things like that. It took them a while, some of them a while to kind of adjust because back then there weren't so many women at sea, at least not around the vessels I was on. And then there was some inappropriate comments, but I shut those down pretty quickly just to set the tone. And yeah, there were certain people who I guess were uncomfortable when I became in a position of authority. They didn't uh, they had a hard time handling taking direction or orders, I guess, from a female. Certainly, I will say I noticed that a lot with crew from Newfoundland. Oh, well, shouldn't you be a nurse or a teacher, like, or work at the post office? Because that was all they had ever,
Oh
all they had
man.
ever seen the women in their communities do. The women weren't the ones going to sea, so it was, and I did hear, oh, you're too pretty to work on a boat. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, it just there were a lot of things, and it was really funny. There was one guy, an older gentleman, and he was a deckhand on deck with another guy, um, and they worked together and always two on deck for safety reasons. And I was there as a cadet, and I had been assigned on their shift to learn from them. And the one older guy, he was never really sure like how to speak to me. And so anyway, his name was Kenny, and he was talking to his work partner, Morris. And I was out on deck, but not really near them. And I guess he was telling a joke to Morris just as I was walking over. So I heard the joke, but Morris didn't let on that I was standing behind Kenny. And Kenny was like, "Well, I got one for you, Morris. There are tulips on the table, there are tulips on the walk, but the tulips that I like the most are your two lips around my cock."
You're standing right
And I
behind him.
was standing right behind him.
Oh man.
And I was just like, "Oh, that was a good one, Kenny." And oh, he spun around and his cheeks were like poppy red, and he was stumbling for words. It was quite funny. Anyway, from then on out, we were cool because he knew I wasn't offended um by his joke. And so, then I was one of the guys. um so that was pretty funny.
That's well, I I don't know. I've always considered myself a little bit of a stick in the mud, or maybe I don't know. Maybe it was like part and parcel of like growing up in a divorced home, and it was like always my grandmother and my mom and my aunt and stuff like that. Like I never, I don't know, I the whole there's certain sort of gauche humor, that I never really partook of. I mean, whatever. I'm still a dude, and a dude's gonna make observations that dudes make. I'm not above that, but like, I can understand why this fella's cheeks went full poppy red. I remember I did a few seasons on the ice. Now, obviously, this is not exactly like being on a boat, but like I can imagine when you have a small group of people doing the same thing for extended periods of time, there's that sort of like camaraderie you build with the other people.
You're definitely with these people more than you are with anybody else. I mean, so, well, as a cadet, I mean, I was on board for 4 months straight, which isn't normal with Canadian contracts. But most of the people on that ship, they were doing 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off. But you're there, and 24 hours a day. And if you're on shift for 12 of those hours with the same person, I don't spend 12 hours a day with my husband or my son. Like, so you do spend longer with them. And then even in your off time, you might go and eat your pre-shift meal at the same time, or end up in the gym at the same time, or watching a movie in the mess room at the same time. So it is intense. And then you do go through sometimes some hair-raising, adrenaline pumping situations with each other too. So that is also builds bonds. And yeah.
Could you describe what one of those situations might be? Like what, like something breaks down on the boat, or maybe there's a fire or something? Like what would you call a hair raising situation?
Well, so after the tankers, I was on anchor handling tug supply vessels, AHTS vessels. And so those are like really large tugboats. And we had a big winch on board for towing. We had other equipment on board, and so we did a lot of different operations. So sometimes you're loading cargo, pipeline, or containers full of gear for the rigs, and then you're bringing it offshore to offload. So you have to position the vessel underneath the crane of either a platform, a rig, or an FPSO, and they'll send down the crane hook and you connect it to the hook on the lifting apparatus on the container, and then they lift it away. But sometimes you're backed in under a rig, and these supply boats have like an open stern.
Yeah, like a rig tender.
Yeah. And so the seas one time were just like shooting up the back deck. Like there was no other way to position the vessel, and we had guys on the back deck, and the seas come up and onto the deck. They're like lifting containers. Some of the containers are open, and we had a guy had to actually like jump in a container so that he didn't get washed off the deck. Things like that. Like you're just out in these sea states, or if it's storming. We were at sea off the coast of Sable Island on a anchor handler when Hurricane Juan came through, and you're looking at 20-meter seas. Like the vessel's just nobody's sleeping for 2 days, rolling out of your bunk. When you go down the stairs, the ship pitches or rolls, and you're just like suspended in midair because the boat dropped out from under you. Like there's all kinds of things that can
Wow.
happen. And you go through things like that. Hurricanes, the big storms, or some of the operations on the back deck when you're hooking things up and you've got wires or chains under tension, and something snaps. And things go awry, and you've got to, stay calm and make sure you're not standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Other times, like we had in the early days of my experiences offshore, when you were loading containers onto the deck, the guys on deck would go and actually push the containers in place while they were still suspended from the crane. And you see guys get their fingers squished between two containers, and
Ugh. Ugh.
like they take their glove off and skin and other
Ugh.
go
Ugh.
with it. And then you got to spring into action to apply first aid and help your teammate, your basically your second family member who's going into shock, and things like
Oh,
that.
oh man. I
um
well, I had it. I remember another seafaring person. I don't know if I read this or it was relayed to me, but the say what was the saying? The ocean is a big scary monster, and sometimes it's trying to kill you. And I can only imagine, like, I worked the dock at Dampier, and some of those rig tenders, like you say, the rear end of the stern end of the ship is basically like an open flatbed. And when you're using the term containers, it's not you're not describing 20-foot and 40-foot ISO shipping containers. They're like open, they're kind of like big steel crates. And sometimes you'll have casing or drill tube or tools or bits or whatever inside them, and there's a bunch of cables that like hook up to the ends. And so like if the boat's kind of like bobbing around in really rough seas underneath a drilling rig, and like so you're trying to hook up a crane to a container on a boat that's getting bounced around by all these waves, it's like the possibilities for disaster are legion.
yep. Yep, it's one of before I started going to sea, one of my mom's phrases was, when something would go wrong, she would always say, "Oh, well, don't worry, worse things happen at sea." And I'm like, "Yes, they do." Don't use
Wow.
that phrase anymore. But yeah, it everything's kind of, big and heavy, and then you got the unpredictable movement thrown into the mix, and things end up under tension, and you just have to be very, very hyper vigilant about your surroundings. That's why there's always at least two people, because you got to look out for each other, and it's exciting. It's a exhilarating place to be at sea. I've crossed the Atlantic Ocean a few times. Once we did it towing an FPSO, which is a floating production and storage object, which is basically a huge tanker that has a turret that fixes to the seabed, where it loads product straight from the oil patch. And they usually stay in one place. But every now and then they need to go for maintenance into a dry dock. And this one was going from offshore Newfoundland to Rotterdam for its dry docking. So our tug, I was on the Atlantic Kingfisher, which is also Atlantic Towing is also an Irving company. So the Atlantic Kingfisher, and we towed it across the Atlantic to Rotterdam, dropped it off there, and then went up to Aberdeen in Scotland to work on the spot market. And you just kind of sit there until some rig needs a tug, and then you get a contract and you go and do whatever the job might be. And then
So
when
tell
that
me
was
tell me how the tugboat slash rig tender spot market works. That's interesting because I met a couple of the guys that worked on the boats in Dampier, and like the crews on these boats would be from all over the world, and like I was on deck. I was actually up in the bridge on one of these boats doing like a safety meeting right before we do loading and unloading. The first mate was from Norway and the captain was, English, and a bunch of the guys on the boat were from the Philippines and a couple of guys from like just all over the world, eh? So and you never quite knew who owned the boats or where they were flagged, and like just because we were working in Dampier didn't necessarily mean that like all the boats were Australian, right?
no, like I was on a Canadian vessel when I was there, and we were tied up with European vessels and a wide variety of different shipping companies that had their boats there. You just kind of Aberdeen's a great spot to hang out while you wait for a job. But
Describe hanging out waiting for a job. What does that entail? Like, so like, do you get to like hang out on shore, or do you have to be set at the ready at a moment's notice to go?
yeah, I mean when you're on board a ship, you have your set schedule of what hours you particularly work. But when your shift's over, you are able to go ashore and explore. Usually you have like an hour's notice. If you get a job and you're going to go, then they can call and get everybody back to the ship that needs to be there. But yeah, like the boats, we would go into the finger piers, tie up, while somebody in the office is, looking at making some deals and finding jobs for the boat to do. It could be as easy as a cargo run. You just load up and bring gear somewhere, or maybe it's a rig move. We did quite a few rig moves up there. The drilling rigs, they'll put out anywhere from 8 to 12 anchors. They'll hire usually about 3 vessels, maybe 4. And they go out, and each vessel might lift 3 or so of the anchors for the rig, and then one of them will be the lead towboat. But you'd have a couple of boats still attached as brake boats as well. And then you move the rig to a new location, and then you set the anchors back down. So it could be that, and all of it's very weather dependent. Sometimes you get hired and then the weather gets bad. So you just sort of, you're on hire, but you're waiting, and then you got to move as soon as you get a weather window. We ended up on standby in the Shetland Islands over Christmas one year, which was great. The weather was terrible, and we were on hire for this rig move, but we knew it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. So I don't know. We had at least 10 days tied up waiting for waiting for this weather window. So we had a quite enjoyable Christmas in the Shetland Islands.
Oh my. I've been to Scotland once. I was over in the Outer Hebrides, but that's not where the oil drilling goes on. The oil drilling is like much further north and east of there, correct? Like the other
Uh,
side?
North Sea and yeah, north of Norway, there's quite a bit. All around the Shetlands, like there's a huge offshore oil and gas industry over there.
Did you ever get up to the Faroes?
Uh, didn't make land there, but certainly in the waters around them.
Right. When I was younger and I was a little bit more footloose and fancy free, I was always plotting my next like backpacking adventure. I mean, most of them remained fantasies and were never realized, but I remember reading in a book one time that you could book travel on certain cargo ships. Like you would pay them to be a passenger. I don't know how much of that still goes on. Maybe it got like blasted away by insurance, or maybe boat companies don't do it anymore. I don't know. But I was trying to plot this trip where I would go from St. John's, Newfoundland, up to Iceland. And then in the summertime, there's a ferry that goes from the east side of Iceland from this place called Seyðisfjörður. And you can go to the Faroes. And then once you're in the Faroes, you can take another ferry south to Scotland or carry on east to Norway. Um, I think that ferry still runs. I just never organized the cargo ship part from Newfoundland to Iceland because there's a big shipping company in Iceland called Emskip, which I think is the sort of like state-run shipping company there, and they stopped taking passengers on board their cargo runs
Okay.
for some reason. So I never did make the St. John's to Reykjavik connection and ended up I did go to Iceland at one point, but like I did it like everybody else. I flew.
Yeah, no, the I'm skip they still their ships come in and out of Halifax all the time, but yeah, I'm not sure if they I guess is what you're saying that they don't bring passengers anymore, then they're just bringing us cargo.
Yeah,
But I
Skip does a milk run. They sort of do. They hit all the ports along the east coast. I think they go to like they'll leave Reykjavik, they'll hit St. John's, Halifax, Boston, New York, and then do the same thing on the way back.
yeah, no, they we see them in and out of port here. But I know like the quite a number of people, Europeans, they'll put their campers on auto carriers and get them shipped over here, and then they'll fly over and get their camper and do like cross North America road trips, and then bring them back to Halifax and get it back on a auto carrier to go back to Europe.
So when you say auto carrier, other people might call them rows. You roll on and roll off the freight.
Yep, yep. I get called that as well. We get a lot of those here, like any European made vehicle has probably come through Halifax
So
on its way to here.
I haven't been to Halifax in a long time. I think the last time I was in Halifax was like, whoa, 2008. It's been a little while, but so Halifax has a really interesting sort of history because of Bedford Basin, which is like you have the Narrows, right? You come into Halifax from the ocean. There's like a long Narrows, and then like a bunch of bridges that go over from Halifax over to Dartmouth, or like as some of the locals call it, Springfield and Shelbyville. And then you have this big, huge, basically basin. And like back in the day when they were organizing, fleets of cargo vessels for the war effort during World War II, like everybody would like get together and make a fleet in Bedford Basin, and then all head off across the ocean together.
Yeah, there's two bridges there that cross from Halifax over to Dartmouth and the Narrows, and yeah, it's a big harbor with lots of different docks. We take all kinds of vessels. Coast Guard has a base here. We've got the auto port. We've got a couple different container ports. There's a big naval dockyard. Plenty of tour boats for the summer. There's a gypsum dock in the basin. Uh,
A gypsum dock. So you mean like dry bulk, just like powder gypsum?
yep.
Right. Is there like a gypsum mine nearby, or is like that coming from other places?
There is gypsum mines in Nova Scotia. I believe it's the Hantsport area, which isn't far. It's not far at all from Halifax. Lots of trains that come and take away the different cargoes as well. It's quite a hub of all kinds of transportation.
Yeah, yeah. Halifax has always been a big deal in that way. And I recall there's some kind of like a maritime museum there. I think I visited once.
Yes, yep, right down on the waterfront. I think it's maybe Maritime Museum of the Atlantic.
There's sort of like like a long cultural history of seafaring too, right? Like sort of embodied by people like, Stan Rogers, the singer from Cape Breton. Is he from Cape Breton or is he from like the mainland? I don't want to offend any Stan Rogers fans that might be listening to this.
Yeah, he is a popular guy. He was actually born in Ontario, um, but he spent a lot of his summers in the Guysborough County area of Nova Scotia.
Right. Is that's mainland or Cape Breton?
Mainland is Guysborough.
Okay. And is that where like the festival that celebrates his music and life takes place?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I've never been to it, but I've heard of it, and I understand it's quite a big deal.
Yeah, I've never actually been to it myself either, but I've wanted to in the past. It just never worked out. A lot of times I was at sea when it was going on.
Right. So, since you first, what year was it when you arrived in St. John and went to work for Irving's?
2000.
So have you lived continuously on the East Coast ever since?
No, no, I was still living in Owen Sound that when I first started because of school. And then when I finished the school, I moved to Halifax to start my career there. I was in Halifax for 2 years. And then I moved so I was working for Atlantic Towing and I was on the supply boats working offshore Sable Island with the rigs there. And then it got a bit political with the offshore oil and gas industry, and the contracts that we had were being moved to St. John's, Newfoundland, to the Grand Banks rigs and fields, oil fields, and basically management came and told crew that we would have to move or lose our jobs because they wanted, I believe it was 97% of the crew to be to local to St. John's. So I moved. I was at the time footloose and fancy free. So I thought, what the heck? Yeah, I'll move. Um, and so I lived in St. John's for 3 years, working offshore there.
Like
Um,
right in the city, or
yeah, yeah, downtown on the corner of Gower Street and King Street, right across from Halliday's Meat Market, which any Newfoundlanders here will, or at least some townies, they'll know of. It was a lot of fun. But I personally found the weather there a bit depressing. And it was,
North Atlantic cold and gray a lot of the time?
cold, gray, windy, foggy. And then when you're working offshore on the Grand Banks and you're there for 28 days and you don't see further than a few meters in front of your face day in and day out because it's so foggy. It's like working on a or inside a cotton ball. It's hard on the head.
It's funny. I had a conversation with some friends. We were talking about the science fiction series that was on. I can't remember. It was like one of these streaming services. It was an adaptation of this book series called The Expanse. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
All right. So The Expanse was this. It's basically a series of novels that are set several hundred years in the future. Humans have colonized the moon and Mars and a bunch of the moons that orbit Jupiter and Saturn. And there's this whole kind of economy of mining, these moons and a couple of the asteroids in the asteroid belt. And there's this whole social dynamic because like Earth is overpopulated, so they don't let anybody that lives out there move back. And Mars does the same thing. Like Mars is its own thing now. And then there's everybody that lives on bases in the asteroid belt or on these various moons of Jupiter and Saturn. And those people are roughly called belters and are represented by this political organization called the Outer Planets Alliance. But anyway, one of the things that struck me in watching this series is like everybody who is living on Mars or any of these bases out in space, you never really get to see the sun. You never get to like step on grass, go for a walk in the woods. Like you're living in a tube in space or in
Yeah.
a tube or a building on the ground on a moon of Jupiter that's, however many gazillions of hundreds of millions of miles away from here, and like that's your life. There's no going back to Earth, right? And
Right.
so the OPA people are kind of like, I describe them as like space Antifa. They're just pissed off at everything and causing trouble, and I kind of get why. Like and I mean, maybe this is not a unique observation to me at all, but like, if people are going to make, space exploration a thing, and Elon Musk wants to take people to Mars and all that, but like maybe they need to talk to people like you who, as you say, you lived in a cotton ball for a month and it drove you crazy. Well, imagine being stuck on a spaceship going to Mars for however many years it takes you to get there, and then you set up Mars, and then you want to turn around and come home, and it's like, what's that going to do to the human psyche living in a steel tube for years on
Yeah,
end?
and only having, the same conversations over and over again with the same people. Um, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, that's for sure.
And like you say, like even when you got home to St. John's, and St. John's is a lovely place. I've only been there once. I hitchhiked back and forth across Newfoundland in like 2002 when I was a kid. Newfoundland or St. John's is a colorful place. The people paint all their houses all these wild and wacky colors.
Jelly Bean
Um,
Road.
yeah, lots of different characters. The harbor is compact enough that you can like walk around it and see all the boats, and it has its own energy and its own charms. But as you say, if you live there full time, you're dealing with the vicissitudes of North Atlantic weather, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like I say, I'll take your word for it. That it's not a lot of fun if you like the sun.
Yeah, and there's a sort of saying that, oh, yeah, summer was on a Thursday last year.
Oh man, I mean, I lived in the far north for a little while. I mean, I did a few winters up in Yellowknife, and I did one season doing the Mackenzie Valley Winter Road, and went to these little places like Norman Wells and Colville Lake, and I can only imagine their summers are equally short like St. John's are.
Yeah, so I stayed there for a good solid 3 years. After that, I moved to Charlottetown. I decided to go back to upgrade my marine license at the Holland College Marine Training Center, and that's in Summerside in Prince Edward Island. So I was there for about 8 months and then moved to Charlottetown and ended up staying in PEI for 10 years, before almost 10 years, 9 and a bit years anyway, before then uh, moving to back to Halifax, which I guess was just about 6.5 years ago. I ended up here. So yeah, I did stay on the East Coast. Mostly because when I was living in PEI, I met the man who's now my husband. And
Is he a
yeah,
native?
we
Is he a native islander?
no, he was born in Quebec,
Oh,
but his father was an islander born on in PEI, and so his father's side of the family is all mostly still in PEI.
10 years in Prince Edward Island. Did you ever? So I've heard a few things from different people that have moved there.
Yep.
Just like, I mean, obviously Newfoundland's an island and there's Newfie culture and it's its own thing. But PEI, I've also only ever been once. I was also on a hitchhiking mission. I did a lot of that when I was a kid. And I was on both sides of that equation too. Being a trucker, I
Uh-oh.
picked up lots of hitchhikers. But I go to PEI, and everybody there I met, even though they could tell right away that I was from away because of my accent, they would still ask me what my last name was. Like it was like an automatic social thing there, which ties into observations I've heard from other people who moved to Prince Edward Island, that got its own weird insular cultural thing going on.
They try to place you somehow for sure. I got it that a lot in Newfoundland. Oh, Bonsor, that's not an island name. No.
But I mean, at least the Newfies have a reputation for being super friendly. I mean, I don't know if that's just like an initial thing, or does that like wear off after you've been there a while? Like, I'm not sure.
Well, yes, when you're a visitor, when you're a tourist to Newfoundland, best kind. They will. It's certainly a very friendly welcome. If you are a female upper Canadian who moves to Newfoundland to work, then you're taking a job from a hardworking Newfoundlander, and the attitude changes quite quickly.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. So there's that, which I did not experience in PEI, that type of attitude. And I actually found the Prince Edward Islanders to be far more welcoming.
Huh.
So, yeah, it was but the big but I mean, yeah, I moved to Newfoundland for my job, but I was highly qualified and skilled, and not just anybody can do that job. um and I felt like Newfoundlanders forget how many of them moved to Alberta to take
I
jobs,
was gonna
so
say because I between yeah I did 7 years in Western Canada, 4 in the Northwest Territories and 3 in Alberta. But my time in the Northwest Territories was always, half of that was going back and forth from Edmonton to Yellowknife. So I mean, effectively, I did 7 winters in northern Alberta with a few excursions further north. And the Newfies and Nova Scotians and even a few PEI people,
yeah.
lots of guys from New Brunswick. Like it seemed like the whole, if not for most of the Maritimes decamping to Alberta, they wouldn't have anybody to work. You know?
Yeah, and it's almost like a way of life here. Like it's a lot of people where they grew up, it was expected that that's what they were going to do, is move west to get work. So I'm not so sure why it was such a offensive thing for me to move east to get work, but I guess it doesn't always work both ways. Um,
No, no, no. Humans are nothing if not inconsistent.
yeah.
In certain respects.
Yeah, so that was my experience. But I really, I mean, you get there is a group called the CFAs that come from a ways. And you might get labeled that way, or some are proud to be the CFAs, but they did have little like network where people who weren't from the island could get together and socialize, but I never did participate in any of that.
I
I
had a
think,
I had a friend, this guy I hung out with. I lived in New Zealand for a little while. I've been there a couple times, and I became pretty friendly with this local fella named Ryan, and he ended up getting married to a young lady from Sweden, and he moved back to Sweden, and he lived in Sweden with her for a long time, and he found the same thing with the Swedes, where he they put on an air of being cosmopolitan and world travelers and accepting of everybody and super progressive and all the rest of it. But like he felt totally socially frozen out of everything. And he had the same thing. Like when he was hanging out in Sweden, most of the people he hung out with were non-Swedes because even his wife's family never really accepted him.
oh
And
wow.
he just found this like weird social isolation. I mean, he learned how to speak Swedish. He put his best foot forward, tried to do the whole thing, and that that social isolation that he experienced was I wouldn't say a major part, but it was definitely part of the reason him and his wife ended up getting divorced and he left.
Oh wow, that's too bad. No,
So,
it's not unique to the Maritimes then.
yeah, the dark side of the Newfies.
But no, it's I have to say, like working at sea, like as gotten to travel quite a bit in your career, it's that was been one of my favorite parts of my time. Like I worked on a private yacht all over the Mediterranean and installed high voltage power cables in the South China Sea. Did work in the Gulf of Mexico. Like it's there's been lots of opportunities for some great adventures
Yeah,
in
wow, that's
this
amazing.
field.
So you're in the South China Sea. You said you're laying electrical cables, like ones like along the bot, like the seafloor.
Yeah, so there was another vessel that came and did uh, like trenching to build a little ditch. It had to be about a meter down, and then the high voltage power cables went from mainland China to Hainan Island. It was about 30 kilometers, and we had three cables that went down. And then somebody else comes to make the connections at the end. But then we had a machine that kind of buried it afterwards. It was pretty neat. Like uh, we were on a barge that was operated with the dynamic positioning system. So my job was there as senior dynamic positioning operator to maintain the vessel's movements while all the operations were happening subsea. We had remotely operated vehicles or ROVs on board that went down to keep eyes on the operation. The ROVs, when they were down there, we saw like mines from uh, the war because we were in the area very close to Vietnam. So there was that was we had to sort of step back and get that investigated before going any further, not wanting to
Oh
disturb
man.
it. um, and it was just
So
really interesting things to be seen in the different way things operate in different bodies of water.
right. So was there any particular sea or area of the world you worked in where, for lack of a better way of putting it, it was like the 401? There's just like boats everywhere coming and going, like super busy.
Yeah, over in that part of the world, like I didn't work out of Singapore, but Singapore is like that. And where we were in that part of the South China Sea was quite busy with traffic. Parts of the Gulf of Mexico is pretty high traffic. There's a lot of in oil and gas exploration offshore there, and then the English Channel, but things really operate very smoothly there. Way it's all set up. It's designed for a lot of movement in both directions to
So there's
operate.
there's like there's like so would there be like lanes, right? So like you're in the English
Mhm.
Channel, and let's say you're a boat that's like you've come out of the Mediterranean, you come out of some port, say in like Italy or maybe Israel or somewhere, and you're going to Rotterdam. So like, do you hug one particular coastline? So it's like the French side like northbound and the English side like southbound or something like that.
Yes, yeah, it's much like the road that way. Yeah, that there's very well laid out lanes on a chart. You have to be able to interpret what's on the chart with what's on your radar. Now with electronic charts and radar overlays, there's definitely more technology making it easier. We also have AIS, automated identification system. So then every boat like emits their position and their vessel information. So instead of back in the day, you would have to, if you wanted to contact another vessel to find out what their intentions were, you'd say like vessel in position and list a latitude and longitude. Now you can look and be like, oh, that ship is named, Cuddy Sark, and then you can call them by name, and so it makes communications
So is everybody
That's
everybody in certain areas all monitoring a particular maritime radio frequency like at all times?
they're supposed to be. Yep. um, VHF channel 16 is an emergency channel that's monitored. And then the different areas, like when you come into Halifax Harbor, you'll switch to channel 12 or 14, depending if you're in the inner harbor or outer harbor. And then the Marine Communications and Traffic Services Center will be monitoring that. And you can contact the other vessels on those stations, but you should always have 16 on the listening. That's where people would send out their maydays and things like that. And English is the international language of the sea, but it doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to understand each other's English either.
I was gonna say if you're over in this, let's say you're in the South China Sea or anywhere off the coast to say China or Vietnam or something, and there's like you know hundreds, if not thousands, of different little fishing vessels. I
They're not carrying radios. They were on like literally like what you would call a Chinese junk boat, and it was they yeah. But we did carry two translators, so each shift had their own translator, because the barge we carried some Chinese crew. They had to be on board as part of the contract. So we also had very strange communications with them. So the translator helped with that. Um, so not just, vessel to vessel or ship to shore, but also even internally on board the ship, we had um, the translator available. Our translator had actually worked as a waiter in New York for 12 years. So his English was quite good.
Oh wow. Yeah, just the people you meet at sea, just the incredible wide variety of just different nationalities and ethnicities and social classes. Like I imagine you've had pretty interesting human interactions. Never mind just being out on the boat.
Oh, 100%. It was wide ranging. And it was really good. On one vessel I was on, we carried up to 132 people between the marine crew and the construction crew, and we represented 17 different countries on board. There were a lot of really interesting people from various backgrounds, and it was really interesting observing the interactions between people from the different nationalities on board.
Yeah, well, I mean, friendly uh friendly classism, friendly racism, friendly ethnicism, and or not so friendly is sort of international. Like everybody makes fun of everybody else no matter where you are, right?
Yeah, yeah, there was a bit of that for sure. And then I enjoyed kind of sitting back and observing two people with both of whom English was their second language, having conversations. And oftentimes I did have to jump in and interpret the English because the accents made a lot of the words sound quite differently. So it was it was a good time. I enjoyed that part of it, the social aspect alongside the work.
I wonder there's a couple. So the trucking industry is pretty lopsided towards dudes, right? Like
Yeah.
in the United States, I think it's something like 94 or 95% of truck drivers are men. In Canada, it's like 96. At sea, what's that percentage?
Oh gosh. It'd be hard to say. When I first started, it would be a lot smaller than it is now. I did notice that working for a European company, I they had more females on staff than the Canadian companies at the time. But now working in the office in the Coast Guard, I see we have a fair number of females on board our vessels. So it is increasing, but still, far in favor of the male numbers are just higher.
Right.
It's gonna stay that way. I know that. I mean, I knew in Thunder Bay, a family friend's daughter was an officer on the Great Lakes, and my dad connected us before I went to the program because he thought, "Oh, you should talk to Julie. She'll give you some great insight and advice and whatnot." And when I did speak with Julie, she was like, "So I'm probably not going to say what your dad wants me to say." She's like, "Well, I'm just going to say, don't do it." Like she's like, I know you're going to do what you want to do anyway, but don't do it. I didn't really understand why she would say that at the time. But yeah, the longer, when I was actually in the industry, I could see why. I mean, she was older than me and started in the industry before me. So she would have had even less other females. And working on the Great Lakes is a whole nother kettle of fish, I'm sure. And then I mean, you often see, dads at sea. Lots of guys, they have families at home and whatnot, but you don't really run into moms at sea. Like, so if you're going to start a family, or like, I mean, I couldn't continue personally going to sea and leave my son for months at a time, but it just seems in a lot of cultures it's the norm for the men to go away to work and whatnot. So there's that. And it's like you always, as a female on board a ship, you basically have to work twice as hard and you're still considered half as good. It's just
Yeah.
unfortunate, like, challenge that you come up against. You really have to, like, every single time you walk on a ship, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, you still have to prove yourself as a female. Whereas, like, a guy walks aboard and nobody bats an eyelid or doubts their capabilities, So it's a reality I found in the industry, and so that can be, a bit frustrating when you know what you've accomplished, and you know when you walk aboard,
Yeah,
not it's not as
there's something about like human social dynamics that you just, no matter how hard some people might want to wish them away or try and change them, like they are what they are.
yeah.
And I follow a couple of folks online. There's like these organizations, Women in Trucking, and they try and advocate, for, particularly female concerns, when being truck drivers, life on the road and different things they're, up against. And I get it. I don't besmirch them, their project, and I don't besmirch anybody trying to get any particular job. But at the same time, like, there's sort of hard baked realities into the human experience that are just, they're always going to be there. And I think the attempts, I mean, whatever, you can maybe try and shave the hard edges off them, but like, you know, dudes are dudes and women are women, and that's that, right?
Yeah, it's you like to think that barriers are being broken and strides are being made, but it's slow. It's
Are
slow.
there organizations that are trying to get more women to take the step to the life at sea?
I mean, I would, they certainly say advertising for the Coast Guard. They have, women on the brochures and things like that. And they usually have a female seafarer at the, like, recruitment drives and things like that at the booth, or to go and speak in a school and things like that. But I don't know if there's any other, sort of situation where that's happening. I'm not really sure. I didn't know too much about it when I started. I didn't really know what to expect. I just always go into everything with a can-do attitude, and, like, never really thought about people thinking I couldn't do it. And so when you come up against it, it's a bit of a slap in the face. But no, I think just it's a great career. It was exciting challenges, great people to meet, places to see, and all of that. But yeah, it just depends what kind of life like long term. I mean, if you don't want to start a family, like then yeah, like you could do this for a really long time, I think, and be quite happy and fulfilled.
I was gonna say there's an awful lot of antinatalists out there, or at least people who pose as such. I used to be one when I was younger. I grew out of it. Thank God I have two beautiful daughters here and a wonderful family. But there are some people who are serious about that, and maybe they should go work on boats.
Yeah, no, certainly I was all career, career, career for a really long time. I mean, I had my son quite late in life. Like he was born 2 weeks before I turned 40. So I had already kind of accomplished a lot of what I wanted to do at sea before stepping back. And I'm kind of glad I did it that way, to be honest. To I'm also glad that I did make the choice to have him. He's a pretty awesome little dude, and
Do you have any other children or just the one son?
no, just one and done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I started late too. My eldest daughter was born when I was 39. So yeah, it's interesting how be it life at sea or life on the road, it tends to get in the way of certain accepted social norms and family formation and all the rest of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely I did feel like I had to make a choice between going to sea or having a family. Like I didn't feel like for myself that I could still do both. Some days I do more in that life, but every now and then I still get out on a boat. So it kind of scratches the itch, I guess you could say.
So stupid question. Do you and your husband have some kind of pleasure craft together?
No, well, yes, but it's not a marine pleasure craft. We have a Volkswagen Westphalia camper van. So we do land exploration. My husband still works in a seafaring capacity. He's a marine pilot who brings all the ships in and out of Halifax Harbor. And so he spends his days on all the different types of boats with all the different types of crews and going to all the different ports in the harbor and, climbing up a rope ladder from a small pilot boat to a big ship or down if the vessel's departing. And so, yeah, when he's got really no interest in owning a boat. So, yeah, so we do some big trips with our camper van instead.
All right. Well, if you ever find yourself in the U.S. in the vicinity of Ithaca, New York, or upstate New York at all, make sure you give me a call and pop in and say hello.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would do that for sure. Um, yeah, we're looking at not this summer, the summer after doing another cross country adventure, this time with our son in tow. And so yeah, we'll have to coordinate something.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you very much for joining my show and telling us all about your life at sea, man. That was super interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't even get to half the story. So the next time, if you want to do it again, we'll have to just talk about the private yacht experience. That's a whole nother world.
Yeah, no, we should. And my cousin's ex-husband is a private yacht relocator crew guy. His whole life has been in yachts. He's Australian.
Nice.
Yeah, we could maybe I'll get him to come on. Y'all can compare notes.
Do a group chat. Oh, that'd be great. No, I appreciate you and your podcast and taking the time to talk. And yeah, I'll look forward to hearing this when it's published.
All right, cool. Thanks very much, Jessica.
Thank you. Have a good one, Gord.